The salt spray stung my eyes like tears I couldn't shed, as the deck of the Endurance heaved beneath my feet in the relentless Atlantic gale. Captain Elias Hawthorne's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, barking orders that pinned me in place more surely than any rope. In that moment, with the ship tilting toward oblivion and his gaze locking onto mine for a heartbeat too long, I knew the real storm wasn't the one outside Deet, was the one raging unspoken between us. I was 18 when I first stepped aboard the Endurance, a battered fishing vessel out of Gloucester, Massachusetts, chasing cod through the fog-shrouded banks off the coast of Maine. Benjamin Hale, that was me, a scrawny kid from a crumbling mill town in upstate New York, where winters bit deeper than regret and summers offered nothing but the hollow echo of factory whistles long gone silent. My father had been a steelworker, his hands calloused from punching time clocks until the plant shuttered and he punched out for good, leaving behind a widow's pension and a son who dreamed of horizons wider than the rusting chain-link fences of Schenectady. The sea called to me in whispers from old maritime tales my grandmother spun by the wood stove, stories of men who bent the waves to their will. But I wasn't running to adventure. I was fleeing the suffocating questions that had started to claw at my chest: who I was, what I wanted, why the boys in my high school locker room made my pulse race in ways that twisted my gut with shame. Gloucester was a far cry from the Adirondack chill. The harbor smelled of brine and diesel, a gritty perfume that clung to everything. I arrived in late spring of 1995, my duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the last of my savings burning a hole in my pocket enough for a bunk and a chance to prove I wasn't the disappointment my father had always hinted at. The Endurance loomed like a relic from another era, her hull scarred from decades of skirmishes with nor'easters, her masts creaking under the weight of faded glory. She was captained by Elias Hawthorne, a legend in these parts, whispered about in the salt-crusted taverns like he was half man, half myth. 42 years old, broad-shouldered and unyielding as the granite cliffs, with eyes like chipped slate that could silence a squall with a stare. Born and bred in Gloucester, he'd fished these waters since he could walk, inheriting the trade from a father lost to the sea and a mother who mended nets with prayers on her lips. Elias was the kind of man who commanded respect without asking, his voice a low rumble that carried the authority of tempests weathered and won. But there was something else in him, a shadow that flickered behind the stern mask, a loneliness etched as deep as the crow's feet framing his gaze. I didn't know any of that on my first day. All I knew was the knot in my stomach as I boarded, the other hands eyeing me like fresh chum. There was Tommy Ruiz, a wiry Portuguese-American from the Cape with a laugh like cracking ice and tattoos snaking up his arms from his Navy days. Old Harlan Fisk, pushing 60, his face a roadmap of sun and sorrow, who spoke more to the gulls than to us. And a handful of others, ghosts of Gloucester's fading fleet. They sized me up quick, too green, too soft around the edges, and I felt it like a brand. Elias was last to appear, striding from the wheelhouse with the economy of a man who'd never wasted emotion in his life. He paused at the rail, scanning us with that piercing look, and when his eyes landed on me, it was like the world narrowed to the space between us. "Hale," he said, my name flat as a stone skipped across water. "You pull your weight or you swim home. No second chances on my ship." That was it. No handshake. No welcome. Just the weight of expectation settling on my shoulders like an anchor chain. We shoved off at dawn, the engine growling to life as the sun bled pink across the horizon. The work was brutal, from the jump hauling lines that bit into palms, gutting fish until my arms screamed and the deck ran slick with blood and viscera. I puked over the side on the first swell, the others chuckling it off as initiation. But Elias didn't laugh. He watched from the bridge, his silhouette etched against the rising light. And in the brief moments our paths crossed, his presence was a force field repelling, yet drawing me in with an ache I couldn't name. Nights were worse. Bumped in the FOCSLE. The air thick with snores and the tang of unwashed bodies. I'd lie awake staring at the riveted ceiling. The ship's roll lulling me into half-dreams where faces blurred me father's stern disapproval. The fleeting brush of a classmate's hand in the schoolyard shadows. And always, threading through it, Elias's glance from earlier that day, lingering like a bruise. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was curiosity laced with terror. The first crack in the facade I'd built to survive a world that didn't bend for boys like me. I was straight, I told myself. Or at least that's what the whispers in my head insisted. Girls in town. Soft curves and easy smiles, that's what normal looked like. But normal felt like a lie slipping down my throat. Bitter as bile. By the end of the first week, the rhythm of the sea had seeped into my bones. We'd hooked into a decent run of cod. The holds filling with silver flashes that promised a payout come shore leave. Elias ran a tight ship. No slacking. No stories unless the lines were coiled. He was everywhere and nowhere, correcting a knot with a grunt. Adjusting the helm with hands steady as prayer. His voice cutting through the wind to redirect a wayward trawl. I caught myself watching him. Stealing glances when I thought he wasn't looking. Memorizing the way his jaw set against the spray or how his fingers flexed around the wheel. Calloused and sure. Once, during a lull, he caught me at a tourize meeting across the deck as Harlan cracked a joke about mermaids luring sailors to their doom. Elias's stare held, unblinking, a storm cloud gathering force. And I felt exposed. Raw. Like he'd seen straight through to the churning mess inside me. That night, as the Endurance ghosted through fog thick as regret, I cornered myself in the head, splashing cold water on my face until it numbed the flush creeping up my neck. What was this? A crush. On a man twice my age. My captain. The embodiment of everything rugged and untouchable. The thought twisted like a knife, sharp with the fear of what it meant. Back home, the church my mother dragged me to preached fire and brimstone for sins like mine, if they even had a name for it. Here, on this floating world of men, the lines blurred, but the judgment loomed just as large. I dried off, avoiding my reflection, and stepped out into the dim corridor where Elias was waiting, leaning against the bulkhead with a mug of coffee steaming in his grip. "Hail," he said, voice low, almost gentle in the confined space. It was the first time he'd spoken to me alone, and the air thickened between us. "You settling in?" I nodded, throat tight. "Trying, sir." He studied me then, really studied, his eyes tracing the lines of exhaustion on my face. The uncertainty I couldn't hide. For a second, the stern mask slipped, revealing a flicker of something human, weariness. Maybe. Or recognition. "The sea doesn't care about trying," he murmured, sipping his coffee. "It demands everything. Or it takes it." He pushed off the wall, brushing past me close enough that I caught the scent of him, salt and tobacco and something earthier, like pine from forgotten shores. His shoulder grazed mine, a spark in the damp air. And then he was gone, leaving me adrift in the echo of his words. That brush was the beginning of the unraveling. Days blurred into a haze of labor and longing. The Endurance cutting through swells that mirrored the turbulence building in my chest. We'd hit a storm off Georges Bank, the kind that turned the ocean into a beast with teeth, waves cresting 30 feet. Wind howling like the damned. I was on deck with Tommy, wrestling a fouled line when a rogue swell slammed us broadside. The world inverted. I slipped. The rail, my only salvation. Fingers scrabbling for purchase as the sea roared below. Time stretched. Cold fear flooding my veins. And then a hand strong, unyielding clamped around my wrist. Elias, hauling me back with a growl that drowned the gale. his body shielding mine as we crashed against the superstructure. Damn fool. He spat once we were secure. But his grip lingered a beat too long. His breath ragged against my ear. Rain lashed our faces, mingling with the sweat of survival. And in that chaos, our eyes locked again. His were wild. The storm not just outside, but breaking free inside. A raw vulnerability that mirrored my own terror. He released me abruptly, turning away with a curse, barking orders to the crew as if nothing had happened. But something had. In the aftermath, as we limped back to port with torn nets and bruised egos, I replayed it endlessly, the heat of his hand, the unspoken plea in his gaze. It wasn't just rescue. It was connection, fragile as sea glass, glinting with possibility and peril. Shore leaving Gloucester brought no relief. The town was a postcard of weathered clapboard and lobster buoys. But beneath the quaint facade lay the grind of lives tethered to the tide. I wandered the wharves alone, nursing a beer in a dive called the Crow's Nest, where fishermen swapped tales of ghosts in the fog. Elias was there too, at the bar, his back to the room, nursing a whiskey neat. I almost left, but the pull was magnetic. Sliding onto a stool a respectful distance away, I ordered the same, the burn steadying my nerves. He noticed me, of course he did. "Hail. You drink like a man twice your age." "Learned young," I replied, surprised at my own steadiness. "Factory life. You." His laugh was a rare thing, rough as gravel. Every night after a loss, sea takes more than it gives. We talked then, halting at first, about the storm, the catch, the way Gloucester's heart beat with the rhythm of the harbor bell. He spoke of his father, drowned when Elias was 15, leaving a boy to captain his own fate. "Learn quick that softness gets you killed," he said, eyes distant. "You build walls. High ones." I nodded, the words landing heavy. Walls keep the cold out, but they keep everything else out too. His gaze sharpened, probing, and for a moment, the bar faded, the clink of glasses, the murmur of voices, until it was just us, suspended in the weight of what wasn't said. He drained his glass, stood. "Get some rest. Hail. We've got banks to raid come morning." But as he passed, his hand rested briefly on my shoulder, an anchor in the storm of my thoughts. That touch lingered long after he'd gone. A promise or a warning. I couldn't tell which. Weeks turned to months, the summer sun gilding the waves as we chased the silver harvest. I grew into the work, my body hardening, calluses forming like armor. But inside, the questions festered. I'd catch myself daydreaming during watches, Elias at the helm, the wind tousling his hair, his commands a lifeline in the vast blue. It terrified me, this pull toward him, a man who embodied the very strength I craved and feared. Was it admiration, hero worship from a kid far from home, or something deeper, forbidden, the kind of love that could capsize everything? One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the deck in fire, Harlan pulled me aside during a rare calm. The old-timer had a way of seeing through bluster, his eyes sharp as gutting knives. "Boy," he rasped, rolling a cigarette with trembling fingers. "You got that look. Like a fish hooked, but fighting the line." I froze, heart hammering. "What look?" He chuckled, smoke curling from his lips. "The one that says the sea's got more than salt in your veins. Elias. He's been there. Lost a brother to it years back. Hung himself in the attic after the town whispered too loud. Captain, don't talk about it. But it carved him hollow." The words hit like a rogue wave, cold and disorienting. Elias. Hollow. The man who stood like an oak against gales. I pressed for more, but Harlan clammed up, muttering about ghosts best left drowned. That night, I lay in my bunk, the revelation churning like bilge water. If Elias carried that scar, did his glances hold not just storm but sorrow? A shared secret, unspoken across the deck. The turning point came in September, as autumn winds sharpened and the leaves along the shore turned to flame. We'd pushed too far north, chasing a rumor of haddock, when the engine coughed and died, leaving us dead in the water 20 miles from anywhere. Panic rippled through the crew, Tommy cursing in Portuguese, Harlan scanning the horizon for salvation. Elias was still, methodically troubleshooting in the engine room, his face smeared with grease, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded with vein and muscle. I volunteered to help, squeezing into the cramped space, our bodies inches apart in the heat and oil stink. "Hand me the wrench," he grunted, and as I did, our fingers brushed deliberate this time, a spark that ignited the air. He paused, wrench forgotten, his breath sinking with mine in the confined dark. "Benjamin," he said, my full name a whisper that unlocked something primal. "No, Hale. No, sir, just me. Stripped bare." The engine room shrank, the world outside irrelevant. His eyes, those storm-held eyes, softened, vulnerability cracking the facade. "You see too much," he murmured, voice rough with conflict. "Boy like you shouldn't be looking at a man like me." My heart thundered, the admission hanging between us like smoke. "And if I can't stop?" The words escaped before fear could cage them, raw and trembling. He reached out then, thumb tracing my jawline, a touch feather-light, yet seismic. Time fractured the hum of the bilge pump, the distant call of gulls all fading to the pulse in my ears. His face hovered close, breath mingling, the storm breaking in slow motion. But then, voices echoed from above, Tommy calling down, and Elias recoiled, the wrench clattering to the floor. "Fix the damn thing," he snapped, turning away. But the damage was done. The line was cast, and I was hooked, reeling toward depths I never imagined. We limped back to port under jury-rigged sails, the silence between Elias and me thicker than fog. Shore leaves stretched into a tense interlude, Gloucester's streets alive with harvest festivals and the scent of clam chowder from street vendors. I avoided the Endurance, holing up in a cheap rooming house, wrestling with the memory of that touch. It wasn't lust, God. No, not like the crude jokes the crew swapped. It was deeper, a yearning for understanding, for someone to see the boy beneath the sailor and not turn away. Elias embodied that promise, his sternness a shield for wounds I now glimpsed. But what of my own? The letters from home piled up, me mother's pleas to visit, her voice in ink laced with worry. "Come back, Ben. The world's not kind to dreamers." She didn't know the half of it. I ran into him at the market, amid bins of lobster and fresh corn, his arms laden with provisions. He nodded curtly, but his eyes betrayed him, storm clouds gathering anew. "Walk with me," he said, not a question. We wandered the wharf, the harbor bells tolling like a heartbeat, words tumbling out in fits and starts. He spoke of his brother, Caleb, a painter who'd captured Gloucester's light in oils but couldn't escape the shadows within. Town called him unnatural, drove whispers like nails into his coffin. Elias's voice cracked on the last word, fists clenching at his sides. I watched it happen, swore I'd never let it touch me. "And me?" I asked, voice barely above the lap of waves. "Am I that touch?" He stopped, facing me with the full weight of his gaze. "You're a gale, Benjamin, stirring things best left becalmed." The admission hung, charged, and for a heartbeat, I thought he'd bridge the gap, pull me close, let the storm rage free. Instead, he turned, shoulders squaring. "Season's ending. Ship's yours if you want it next run." But think hard. This life, it claims pieces of you. He left me there, adrift on the dock. The echo of his words a compass pointing true north for the first time. I knew what I wanted, even if it terrified me. The walls I'd built were crumbling, brick by brick, revealing a heart unafraid to love across the lines society drew in salt. Winter came harsh that year, blanketing Gloucester in snow that muffled the harbor's cry. The Endurance lay up in dry dock, her hull groaning under repairs, and the crew scattered like gulls before a blow. I stayed, taking odd jobs mending nets, hauling ice, anything to keep the sea's rhythm in my blood. Elias vanished into the off-season routine, holing up in his weathered cottage on the eastern point, a sentinel overlooking the breakwater. Rumors swirled in the taverns. The captain kept to himself, shadows lengthening under his eyes. A man wrestling demons that no net could haul. I couldn't stay away. One blizzard night, as winds howled off the Atlantic and visibility dropped to arm's length, I trudged the bluff path to his door, driven by a madness I couldn't name. The cottage was a squat thing, clapboard peeled by years of assault, lamplight flickering through frost-laced windows like a beacon. My knock was tentative, swallowed by the gale, but he opened it anyway, surprise etching his features, hair disheveled, shirt untucked, the stern captain undone. "Benjamin." "What the hell?" "Cold." I lied, stamping snow from my boots. "Needed direction." He stepped aside, reluctance warring with something warmer, and I entered a world of maritime relics, charts pinned to walls, a model schooner on the mantel, the air scented with pipe smoke and solitude. We sat by the hearth, fire crackling defiance against the storm, whiskey warming our palms. Words flowed easier here, away from the crew's eyes tales of my father's decline, the mill town's slow death, the isolation of being the odd one out in a family that prized silence over secrets. Elias listened, really listened, his nods measured, eyes reflecting the flames' dance. "My turn," he said finally, voice gravel rough. Caleb wasn't the only one who felt the weight. I loved him. Not like brothers should, but deeper. Kept it buried, like contraband in the hold. When he couldn't, it broke us both. The confession spilled like blood from a fresh cut, raw and unstaunched. He stared into the fire, shoulders slumped, the unyielding captain reduced to a man adrift. "You stir that up, Ben. Make me remember what it's like to feel alive." The room shrank, the storm outside a mere echo of the one within. I reached for his hand, tentative, and he didn't pull away, fingers intertwining, calluses rasping like whispered promises. "Then don't bury it," I said, voice steady despite the quake in my chest. "Not with me." His eyes met mine, storms colliding, fear, longing, the terror of vulnerability. He leaned in, forehead resting against mine, breath shared in the firelight's glow. No kiss. Not yet. Just the profound intimacy of two souls recognizing their mirror. That night, as the blizzard raged, we talked until dawn, peeling back layers of armor, forging a bond from the wreckage of old wounds. It wasn't romance born of fairy tales, but something harder, one, trust. Fragile as first ice, holding the promise of spring. Spring thawed the bay, and with it came the Endurance's relaunch, her decks scrubbed clean of winter's grime. The crew reassembled, oblivious to the shift between Elias and Maya's subtle language of glances, a brush of hands during line work, conversations laced with subtext only we could decipher. Tommy ribbed me about puppy eyes for the old man, but it was jest without bite. The camaraderie of the sea forgiving quirks that land would condemn. Harlan watched with knowing silence, his nod one morning a quiet benediction. Out on the banks, The work intensified, trawls heavy with cod. The horizon a canvas of endless blue. Elias captained with renewed fire. His commands infused with a lightness that buoyed us all. Yet beneath the surface, our connection deepened in stolen moments, a shared watch at midnight. Stars wheeling overhead as we spoke of dreams deferred, his of charting unknown waters. Mine of a life unapologetic. You're changing me, Ben, he admitted one fog-enshrouded dawn. His hand on my shoulder as the crew slept below, making me believe in calms after storms. But the world ashore wasn't so forgiving. Gloucester's whispers started Smala's sidelong glance at the market, a muttered word in the crow's nest. Old prejudices ran deep in these fishing towns, where men were measured by nets filled and secrets drowned. One evening, after a bumper catch, the crew dragged us to O'Malley's for pints, the air thick with smoke and bravado. Elias and I sat apart, but close enough for the current to hum. Tommy, 3 sheets to the wind, slung an arm around me. Captain S got a soft spot for the kid. What's the story there? Laughter rippled, good-natured at first, but it soured when Red McKenna, a grizzled hand from a rival boat, leaned in with a leer. Soft spot. More like sweet on him. Heard tales about Hawthorne boys. The room stilled, eyes darting, and Elias's face hardened to granite. Watch your mouth, McKenna, he growled, rising slow, a predator uncoiling. Red sneered, emboldened by ale. Truth hurts. Captain, town's always known your kind. Unnatural. The lot of you. The punch landed before I could blink, Elias's fist connecting with Red's jaw in a crack that echoed like thunder. Chaos erupted, chairs toppling, shouts flying, bodies piling on. I dove in, pulling Elias back as fists flew, blood slicking the floorboards. We burst into the night, chest heaving, the cool air a slap of reality. He shook off my grip, stalking toward the wharf, but I followed, the fight's adrenaline morphing into something fiercer. Elias. Wait. He whirled, eyes blazing. Go back. Ben. This. Us. It's poison. No. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to face me under the sodium glow of dock lights. You hit him for us. For what we have. He deflated then, the fight draining like tide from shore. I hit him for Caleb. For every whisper that breaks a man. His voice broke. Raw. I can't lose you to that hate. Can't watch it carve you hollow. We stood there, waves lapping indictment, until I pulled him into shadow. Our embrace fierce against the chill of defiance. A declaration. Lips met tentatively, then with the hunger of storms long denied. But it was more than passion. It was survival. 2 hearts anchoring each other in turbulent seas. We broke apart breathless, foreheads pressed. The world no longer an adversary but a challenge we'd face together. Summer swelled with bounty and tension, the endurance riding high on record hauls. But the undercurrent of scrutiny grew. Letters arrived for Elias, anonymous scrawls from concerned townsfolk, urging him to clean house or face boycotts at the co-op. He burned them in the wheelhouse stove. Jaw set. But I saw the toll, nights pacing the deck. His silhouette a lone vigil against the moonlit waves. Their right to fear us. He confessed one starlit watch. Voice laced with old ghosts. We append their order. Make them question their own chains. I took his hand then. The contact grounding. Or we free them. Show their strength in bending, not breaking. My own doubts lingered, flashes of home. The life I might have led. Straight-laced and safe, but they paled against this truth. Loving him made me whole. The boy from Schenectady reborn in salt and storm. The crisis crested in August. A perfect storm of weather and wrath. A nor'easter barreled in unannounced. fiercer than the one that nearly claimed me. Winds clocking 60 knots as we battled to secure the gear. The crew fought valiantly, but a massive swell sheared a stanchion, sending Harlan overboard in a tangle of lines. Chaos rain shouts piercing the howl. The Siamal hungry for tribute. Elias manned the winch, veins bulging as he cranked against the pole, while I slashed at the fouled rope, knife slipping in numb fingers. Harlan, Tommy bellowed, but the old man was a shadow in the froth. His cry cut short. Elias's eyes met mine across the fury. A silent vow, and with a final heave, we hauled him aboard blue-lipped, gasping, but alive. The Endurance limped to shelter in a cove off Cape Ann, battered but unbroken, the crew collapsing in exhaustion as dawn clawed through the clouds. Harlan survived, crediting the captain's iron will and the kid's quick blade. But the real victory was ours, Elias and me, bound tighter by the night's trial. Yet ashore, the whispers had metastasized. Red McKenna, nursing a busted jaw, had spread tales, painting Elias as a predator, me as his unwitting prey. The co-op denied our unload, citing quality issues, a blatant lie that starved the crew of pay. Families suffered, Tommy's wife pacing with bills, Harlan's meds unaffordable. Rage simmered in the FOCSLE, loyalties fracturing. Elias called a meeting on deck, face carved from resolve. We've fished these waters honest. Let him talk. We'll outlast the storm. But privately, to me, he unraveled. It's my fault, Ben. My past dragging you under. I refused to let him shoulder it alone. Our past, and our future. Together, we rallied the crew not with fists, but truth. At the next town hall, packed with fishermen and officials, Elias stood tall, voice steady as the tide. Gloucester's strength ain't in secrets or stones thrown. It's in the men who face the gale together, no matter who they love. I spoke too, halting at first, then fierce of a boy who found home on this ship. In this man, defying the narrow paths laid for us. The room shifted, murmurs turning to nods, a few hands clapping tentative support. It was an absolution. Change came slow as shifting sands. But Red slunk out shamed. The co-op relented under pressure from allies, and whispers dulled to reluctant acceptance. Harlan, from his sickbed, sent word, about time we fished for light. Not just fish. Fall deepened, leaves carpeting the bluffs in crimson, and with it came a quiet evolution. Elias and I navigated our love with care-stolen hours in his cottage. Walks along the breakwater where gulls wheeled like witnesses. He taught me the stars' navigation, fingers tracing constellations as we lay on blankets under endless sky. You're my north, Ben, he'd murmur. The stern captain softened to wonder. I shared my sketches, rough drawings of the sea's moods, captured in pencil-smudged dreams of a life beyond the hall. Perhaps a small charter, showing others the freedom of open water. Challenges lingered, a letter from my mother, laced with confusion after a cousin's loose tongue, pleading for clarity. I wrote back honest, the words a bridge over chasms. This is my truth, Mom. Love like the ocean vast, unyielding, but worth every wave. Her reply came tentative. A door cracked. Come home. We'll face it together. Elias faced his own reckonings, visiting Caleb's grave under autumn oaks, placing a conch shell as offering. Forgive me, brother, he whispered, and I stood vigil, hand in his, the healing a tide that rose slow but sure. Winter's Eve found us on the Endurance, snow dusting the rails. The crew dispersed, but our bond the ship's true keel. Elias pulled me close by the wheel, breath fogging the air. A year ago, I wanted nothing to do with you. Thought you'd sink me. And now, I teased, heart full. Now, he said, eyes clear as calm seas. You're the storm I choose. The one that brings me home. We kissed then, under gathering flakes. A vow etched in frost and fire. The world beyond might rage. But here, in this harbor of hearts, we'd charted our course to men, remade by love's relentless pull, sailing toward a dawn where storms gave way to enduring light. As the new year dawned, crisp and unyielding, the Endurance stirred once more, her engine thrumming like a heartbeat renewed. Benjamin Hale, no longer the green boy from Schenectady, stood at the bow with Elias Hawthorne, the stern captain whose glances now held not restraint but radiant promise. Gloucester watched from a farsome with wary eyes, others with nods of quiet respect as we cast off into the banks. The crew a family forged in trial. The sea, ever the great leveler, demanded no less than before, lines hauled, watches kept, the endless dance with wind and wave. But now, woven through the labor was a deeper rhythm laughter shared over coffee in the galley. Elias's hand steadying mine during a tricky maneuver. Moments of profound silence where words were obsolete. Tommy had taken to calling us the unbreakable duo, his grin wide, while Harlan, Mended and Mary, spun yarns of legendary captains who loved fiercely and fished true. Yet growth wasn't linear. Shadows lingered, testing our resolve. In March, a brutal squall off Stellwagen Bank tested the ship and us. Waves towered like cathedrals of wrath, the Endurance pitching violently as we clawed for open water. Elias gripped the wheel, face illuminated by the binnacle's glow, his commands a lifeline amid the roar. I was below, securing stores, when a shutter ripped through the Hula bulkhead, cracking under pressure. Water surged in, icy fingers clawing at my legs, and panic flared hot. Ben. Elias's voice boomed from above. But the hatch jammed, debris pinning me. The flood rose, stealing breath. Visions flashing, my mother's face. Elias's touch, the life we'd begun to build. Then, with a Herculean wrench, the hatch gave Elias, soaked and savage, hauling me up, his arms a bulwark against the deluge. We collapsed on deck, gasping, the crew swarming to patch the breach. In the wheelhouse later, alone with the storm's dying moans, he held me fierce. Lost you once in dream. Won't let it be real. Tears tracked his cheeks, mingling with salt water, and I wiped them away. Our bond a lighthouse in the gale. Spring brought renewal, the haddock run exploded. Holds brimming with bounty that eased the co-op's grudging acceptance into fair trade. Elias and I ventured inland one weekend, driving the winding roads to my mother's in the Adirondacks. The mill town slumbered under budding green, smokestacks silent sentinels. She met us at the door, eyes wary but warm, enfolding me in a hug that smelled of lavender and home. Elias hung back, hat in hand, until she pulled him in two. Any man who mends my boy's heart is family, she said over pot roast, her voice thick. We talked late of losses, loves, the courage to claim one's truth. She didn't fully understand, but she tried, and that was bridge enough. Elias opened too, sharing with her tales of Caleb, the brother whose light he'd guarded in memory. Love like ours, he told her. It's not chosen easy, but it's chosen true. Her nod was tentative grace, a mother's fierce protection extending to this unexpected son. Back in Gloucester, we built on that foundation. Elias mentored young hands like me had been kids from broken towns, eyes hungry for more than survival. I'd sketch during lulls, my portfolio swelling with seascapes alive with emotion, storms as metaphors for inner tempests, calms as hard-won peace. One evening, by candlelight in the cottage, Elias flipped through them, softening his features. These are you, Ben. Raw. Real. Publish him. Let the world see. I laughed it off at first, but his belief took root. I submitted to a Boston gallery. Nerves knotted tighter than Boland's. Rejection stung. Then acceptance came me a small show. Tides of the heart. My waves crashing against canvases of prejudice and perseverance. Summer hummed with purpose. The Endurance became a vessel not just for fish, but for quiet activism. Elias hosting talks at the library on maritime history laced with inclusivity. Inviting Harlan to share stories of all kinds of sailors who braved the blue. I contributed illustrations. My art bridging gaps words couldn't. Red McKenna even showed up once. Hat in hand. Mumbling apology over beers. Saw the error. Captain. Life's too short for anchors on the wrong chain. Not all mended smooth. A cousin cut ties. Church doors closed. But for each loss, allies emerged, neighbors dropping pies at the cottage. A bar tab covered by strangers who'd heard our tale. Elias and I grew through it. Our love evolving from fervent spark to steady flame. Mornings, we'd run the bluffs. Breaths sinking like tides. Evenings, cook simple meals. Hands entwined over checkers. Laughter filling spaces once haunted. Autumn painted the world gold. And with it came a milestone, our first anniversary. Marked not with fanfare, but a charter to the Isles of Shoals. Just us and the sea. Under a canopy of stars. Elias pulled a ring from his pocket, simple silver. Engraved with coordinates of our first storm. Not legal yet, he said. Voice gruff. But it's promise. Through every squall. Tears blurred my yes. And we made vows whispered to the waves to hold fast. To weather. To love without apology. The Endurance rode gentle swells home, carrying us toward winter's embrace. Hearts full. As snow dusted the decks once more, we looked ahead, not to tempests unchained, but to a horizon shared. Benjamin and Elias. Once strangers in a storm, now captains of our fate, proof that love, fierce and unyielding, could chart even the roughest seas to shores of profound peace. The circle completed itself in the hush of midwinter, when the world held its breath under ice-laced skies. The Endurance rested, tarped against the freeze. But our journey pressed on, Elias and I, entwined in the cottage's glow, planning expansions, a bigger boat. Perhaps, to host retreats for those adrift like we'd been. Teaching not just knots, but the untying of inner binds. My art show drew crowds from Boston. Whispers turning to acclaim. Galleries clamoring for more. You've captured the soul of the coast. One critic wrote. And the quiet revolutions within. Yet peace wasn't absence of storm, but mastery over it. A letter arrived in February. From a young man in Portland. Your story reached me through a clipping. I'm 19. Scared. But seeing two men build a life. It gives me anchor. We wrote back. Then met him on a blustery spring day. Sharing coffee and truths over the harbor's hum. Elias's eyes, once storm-held, now beamed mentorship. His hand on the kid's shoulder, an echo of our beginning. My mother visited too, bringing Adirondack maple and stories of town folk coming around. Her pride a balm. You taught me to see beyond the waves. Boys. We three walked the breakwater. Her arm linked with ours. A lineage of love unbroken. Summer returned triumphant. The Endurance leaping to life. Crew swelled with new faces diverse. Determined. A microcosm of change. We fished with fervor. Hull sustaining not just bellies but dreams. Scholarships for Tommy's kids. Harlan's retirement eased. Elias and I led by example. Our partnership unspoken but evident. A quiet thunder that inspired rather than intimidated. In the fall, as leaves swirled like confetti, we chartered a wedding not legal. Still a whisper away in Massachusetts law but sacred nonetheless. The crew gathered on a calm cove. Harlan officiating with rum and rings exchanged under autumn sun. Vows rang true, through gales and glass seas. I choose you. Laughter mingled with tears. Toasts to storms weathered. And as dusk fell, Elias pulled me close. From nothing to everything. Ben, you are my held-back storm. Unleashed at last. Winter wrapped us gentle. The cottage a haven of hearth and harmony. Looking out at the frozen bay, I traced the arc from terrified boy to anchored man. From stern avoidance to boundless gaze. Our story, etched in salt and soul, whispered to any ear that listened, love defies the depths. Emerging not just survivor, but transformed. And in that truth, the greatest human victory, hearts held back no more. Sailing free into eternity's embrace.